if a project isn't going to work right or there's a problem, don't sit there and throw good money after bad. I mean, it's sometimes you make a mistake, but you've got to accept the mistake and move on.
Okay, welcome back to the Marketing Playbook presented by Details Interactive. Here you'll take away 3 game-winning marketing plays every episode to take back to your team. I'm your host, Mark Friedman, and my career has been focused on direct-to-consumer marketing, direct mail, physical retail, and digital commerce. This is episode number 75, and today's guest is Mike Relich. Mike is currently the co-CEO at PacSun and has spent his career in the retail industry. He's not my typical guest that's focused mostly on marketing, but Mike's experience in retail and technology systems and operations are a perfect balance of the various marketing professionals that have been on my show. Mike's a longtime industry friend, and I think that you're going to find his insights very useful. Before we get started, a quick thank you, as always, to Max Branstetter of the Wild Business Growth Podcast for producing this episode. You can reach him at maxpodcasting.com to help bring your podcast to life. Let's open the playbook. Ready, break. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Marketing Playbook podcast. Today, I'm joined by Mike Relich. Mike is co-CEO of PacSun with oversight to the company's operations, including sourcing, supply chain, distribution, planning and allocation, IT, finance, legal, and human resources. Under his leadership, the company significantly improved operations at its Groveport, Ohio, DC. Mike has also served in various COO roles for iconic brands such as Lucky Brand, Crate and Barrel, and Guess. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm pleased to be here.
Well, it's nice that we get to see one another. We tend to be working a little bit together these days, so that's nice. Our first opportunity to do that, and I've always appreciated you staying in touch. I think we first met. I was probably at Steve Madden. You were at Guess. We might have been doing a vendor check of some type, and it's funny how so many of the folks that I'm connected with now and have a relationship with, at some point, we did a vendor check together.
Yeah, it's the same with me. There's a lot of people in my network that actually I've first introduced that way, and we've kept in contact, and I think it's pretty valuable.
Absolutely. So the way we get started in this show most of the time is to talk about your first story. I also, as we talk to folks, and I've done more than 70 shows now, it's so interesting how what people have wound up doing for most of their career, a good part of their career, there was some foreshadowing going on as they were earlier in their life and in their career. You've been a retail lifer, it appears. So was there any retail back in the early days of Mike growing up?
The only retail that I had was my brother worked for Sears, and and back then, they were less stringent about labor laws, and I used to help do inventories. And so I think I was like 13 or 14, and they paid me a couple bucks an hour to go count items. And so that was probably my only foray into retail before I graduated from college.
And are you a West Coast guy growing up?
Born and raised in Southern California.
Okay. And then, I noticed University of Maryland.
Yeah, well, it's funny because actually I was made in Canada because my older brothers and sisters, my parents lived in Quebec, and they moved about 3 weeks before I was born. So first American in my family. But the University of Maryland, so my father was an engineer with Bechtel building power plants, and he spent about a decade in Korea. And so I actually lived in Korea for a little over a year, taught English, and I went to a University of Maryland satellite campus in Seoul that serviced the American Eighth Army, and I studied Korean language and accounting and actually anthropology courses.
Well, my son is a graduate of Maryland, a little closer to New Jersey where we live. He went to Maryland, actually in Maryland
Yeah, yeah.
for his schooling. That's great. So we talked about the retail lifer. You got your early start at Broadway stores. You were kind of on the merchandise and promotions side of the business. So what were you doing back then?
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because I graduated. It was the Reagan recession. Unemployment was probably at a post-war high, and it was tough finding the job then. And I went down to the Army recruiter or Navy recruiter, and I took the test, and I was going to be a naval aviator. I wanted to fly planes like my uncle did, and I was literally 3 days away from signing up, and I got a call from Broadway stores. It was Carter Hawley Hill back then. They had a programmer trainee class, and I did come in, take a programmer aptitude test, which I did very well on, and then they offered me to become a programmer trainee in their data center. And at the time, it was big. They owned Neiman Marcus, Bergdorf Goodman, John Wanamaker, Contempo Casuals, Broadway stores, Emporium Capwell, etc. So it was next to Federated Department Stores was the biggest. And I started out actually writing assembly language on a mainframe, and I did that for a couple years, and was a mainframe programmer, and then decided that I didn't like people telling me what to do. I wanted to get into management, so I ended up becoming a manager and then becoming a director, and I managed actually credit and sales promotion systems.
So did you have schooling around systems and tech, or did you kind of learn it, on the fly?
Yeah, well, I was actually in college. I was an anthropology major, and actually, I was working for an archaeological firm. And when people build houses, you need to do a survey and see if there's any Indian artifacts or such. And I was doing that, and I planned to get a PhD in anthropology or archaeology. And I took a programming class, and it was on an Apple II. And oh my God, I had so much fun. I wrote a blackjack game with graphics, got I think 150 points out of 100, and I thought they're going to pay me to do this. Oh man, I want to do this. So I changed my major, and I got my degree in information systems.
Interesting. And so after Broadway, you had a stint at Wet Seal as CIO. So you make this leap now into a CIO role in a retailer. This was, I guess, early 2000s.
It was early 2000s. Yes.
So yeah, this is right around the same time that I was at Brooks Brothers. Talk a little bit about your initial involvement in the web. You're probably from a CIO perspective, that wasn't your initial focus. You had enterprise systems. Did you start taking on responsibilities for digital commerce as well?
Well, just step back. Before Wetzel, I worked for a company called Homebase, and at that time, I introduced the first Linux server and non-mainframe email, and then I actually was working part time on an e-commerce startup called shopping.com. So I kind of sunk my teeth into that. And then I had gone to Homebase. After Homebase, I worked for an e-commerce startup, and this was in basically the 1999 e-commerce boom. And it was a company called Free Borders out of San Francisco, and I think I was the seventh employee. And so I really was, and I saw these startups, and being in San Francisco at the time and watching that was just unreal. I remember going into a meeting with a PowerPoint and walking out with $25 million. And then, of course, that collapsed. So that's how I ended up at Wet Seal. I was hired because they put in Retech, which is Oracle Retail now. I had put that in Homebase and was somewhat of an expert at it. So they had a really problematic implementation, and I came in and cleaned it up, and cut a whole lot of costs. And then I was a little bored because I felt like, okay, I'm the Maytag man now, everything's working. So ecom was losing money, and of course it was the early days. And I went to the CEO and I said, hey, let me run ecom. I've got the capacity and I'm interested. So I took it over, and actually we grew the business and made it profitable. And I was running, not just the web, but also fulfillment in the DC and customer service. So that was my first foray into running e-com operations.
And that business was what vertical? What products were you selling?
Teen fashion. So we were selling knit tops, woven tops, denim, etc. Everything that wet seal was pretty much like Forever 21 in terms of the product categories. We actually did a deal. We're one of the first ones to do a deal with Amazon. Amazon at the time were selling just books and tapes. They approached us, and I thought, hey, we could use the business. Why not? And we were one of the first apparel retailers on Amazon's marketplace back then.
That's amazing. As e-commerce developed in over the years, and you were on the tech side, how do you balance? And by the way, you're the first, probably of the 70 shows I've done, the first non-marketer. That not that you're not a marketer, but you're more of on the operational side of the business. How do you interact? Whether it's in your current place or in others that you've been in, how does somebody in your role with your skills and your responsibilities interact with the marketer in the business?
You look at marketing now, and I remember I was involved in the MIT CIO symposium for a number of years, and I remember being asked a question, and someone said, "Well, the CMO is going to have a bigger budget than IT, and they're going to determine the spend." And I remember looking at them and say, "Well, not as long as I'm involved." But I actually had quite a background in marketing from a tech side. When I was back working at Carter Hawley Hale, Neiman Marcus has a loyalty program in Circle. And actually, I was a programmer and helped develop that system eons ago. I mean, it was on a mainframe, but I worked on that system. For Broadway, we launched basically a marketing program, a loyalty program called Club West. I launched Be Rewarded at Art and B, which was part of Wet Seal. And part of my background at Broadway stores, well, or Carter Hawley Hale at the time, was to manage sales promotion systems. So we wrote a whole promotion tracking system for Neiman Marcus. And so I had a lot of experience working with the marketing folks. And, when you look at marketing, there's two types of people, right? You got the creative people that are all about the creative, and you have what I call the quantitative folks. They're the ones that just looking at data and want to show what's proven, right? And everyone knows, I mean, John Wanamaker, he had a famous saying, and I know half of my marketing spend is wasteful. I just don't know which half. And so a good marketer will always wants to go and say, hey, let me look at data and let's figure out what's working and not spend on what's not working. And so, given my background there, I always try to come in and speak the same language to them, right? And what does a marketer want? I mean, of course, you want to get people to know your brand, but also you want to drive traffic and conversion, and you want to do that with the most effective ROAS, or return on ad spend. And so I try to come in and talk their language and say, hey, I can help you because we have a common goal, which is to grow sales.
When you were at Guess, you had pretty explosive growth in that business. When you're involved in a business like that and you're supporting the systems, how do you kind of keep up with the volume when you've got that kind of growth and keeping systems that are in play to be as supportive as they need to be?
Guess was kind of a challenge because I started there. We were 600 million in revenue. When I left, it was 2.5 billion. Probably 95% of the revenue came from North America when I started. When I left, it was less than half of the revenue. And we had licensees. So it was a combination of buying licensees. Like we bought a license in Europe, we bought a license in Korea, and then we did some organic growth by opening in China, etc. So, the thing is, you have all these systems that are disparate, right? Because when you buy a licensee, they have their own tech stack. And you've got to figure out, it's kind of like you're down the freeway going 100 miles an hour, and how do you change your tires without stopping? And it was kind of tough. And, we were scrappy and we did a lot of innovative things. I mean, I'll just give you just one example. You look at, wholesale was a big component. And we had different wholesale systems. And it was like, well, let's go put in SAP. Well, no, I want to keep my job. But think about it. A wholesale system, you've got local customers. It's a regional it's a regional business. But what I need a common item catalog and I need to make sure I have the same styles across the globe. So I could take a PLM system, impose it on top, and have it talk to different household systems. And as long as I have common reporting, the business can work. So we did some very innovative things along those lines, and I think that helped us keep ahead of the curve.
One of the things, as a marketer, especially on the e-commerce side of things, but I've seen it in enterprise IT, is the challenge of you seemingly never have enough resources to do all the work that you want to do. So how do you work with the business people in prioritizing, evaluating ROI, and making decisions of what's going to get done and what gets tabled?
That's a very, I mean, that is a big problem. And, my rules were always, look, the first thing we're going to do is anything that enhances revenue, right? Is going to get the top priority. And then basically two, anything that's going to cut expense, right? Because to me, it's all about profitability. And then the third thing is, yeah, you've got technical debt and there's certain maintenance things you need to do, but those we would prioritize last. And some of them you have to do, like for instance, let's take PCI, right? The exposure is high. If you're not PCI compliant and you have a breach, it could bankrupt a company, right? So that's something you have to do. But there's other things, oh, it's an old server. Well, you know what? If it works, fine. Let's prioritize it commensurate to the value it's going to add to the business. There's also what's the complex. I could have a high RO, I mean, a high project that's going to generate a lot of value. I mean, a lot of revenue. But if it takes 2 or 3 years and there's high risk to implementing it, that's different. I might have something that has a slightly less payback, but it's something that can be implemented quick. So basically, then I would convince the business, let's do this. But I always approached it from a business point of view because it's like, look, we need to grow revenue. Let's figure out what's going to work. And the other thing is, I believe in this fail fast. If a project isn't going to work right or there's a problem, don't sit there and throw good money after bad. I mean, it's sometimes you make a mistake, but you've got to accept the mistake and move on.
I see so many businesses, and maybe it's smaller than what you're alluding to, but even when you add things to a website, feature and function, it's almost like businesses become emotionally attached. I added X, it cost me X to implement, and now even if I come back and evaluate it and it's not working as I had hoped, they kind of still leave it in there as a badge of honor, so to speak. But you're saying that it makes sense to if you do fail, just kind of move on.
Exactly. And it's amazing because having worked at several companies, and especially companies that have been around for a while, you find out I call it Spanish tradition. You come in, hey, why do you have this and why do you do it, or why are you doing this? And they say, well, we've always done it that way. And then when you dig in on half the stuff, you find out, well, look, we really don't even need this. But to your point, it ends up being a badge of courage. People move on and everyone forgets why it got done to begin with.
Kind of like all the reports that get spewed out every morning in a business, and if you stop sending them all, what percentage of the ones that you've been sending are still going to be requested by people? Who's going to miss them? It just feels like there's so many that get produced.
Well, that's hilarious. I mean, just early in my career, we were using business objects, and we had a project to convert to MicroStrategy. And I mean, not to get off in the details, but we did exactly that. There was like thousands of reports, and I just said, "Hey, stop sending them, and let's see." And to your point, if I asked them, they'd say they need them, but guess what? We stopped sending them. Nobody requested them, and I mean, we'd be surprised. Over half the reports were just nobody used.
Yeah, I've heard that numerous times. Let's talk about we're kind of getting to this culture. You've had the opportunity to be in a number of different businesses. How do you adapt as an employee to companies that have a different culture than maybe the one you came most recently from?
I always consider myself a flexible person and I like to solve problems. So, when I evaluate which companies to go to, it to me, it's always fun to say, if you're going to come in as a Maytag man and just sit there and host town halls, that's not very fun. And that's not something that's for me. But what I like to do is come in and say, okay, look, are you trying to transform the business? Are there certain problems you're trying to fix? And at least get alignment, with management or whoever's hiring me, that, we, the same agenda. And then once you come in, it's always tough. There's always a different culture, but you have to be flexible because, I know from my guest days, when people came in and tried to change what guest was, they failed. And so to me, you have to come in and accept this is the company, but let me see, given the culture, how I can make the biggest impact.
The devil is in the details. You probably have heard that phrase time and time again in your professional life. Projects get started with great intentions, but you no longer have the time to pay attention to the little things that could make the difference between success and failure. At Details Interactive, you can discuss your business with a seasoned direct-to-consumer marketing executive who's helped launch and grow web businesses and integrate multi-channel marketing initiatives. Learn more at detailsinteractive.com. All right, let's jump to your current situation. Help the listeners understand there was something called PSEB, PacSun, Eddie Bauer. Give us some framework of when you got to the company. Was it just PacSun and then Eddie Bauer became part of it, or just lay out that timeline?
So PacSun and Eddie Bauer were both holdings from Golden Gate Capital, and they own both companies, and they were managed separately. It was in their portfolio. So they had made a decision, I believe around 2018, to say, hey, well, why don't we combine these? Because, if you look at Ascena or maybe Tapestry, a lot of retailers were coming in and saying, hey, look, let's go and combine. We'll have a portfolio of brands, and we think we can go and increase EBITDA by taking the back office functions, combining them, getting leverage, and then anything consumer facing we'll keep separate. So the consumer, sees, because Eddie Bauer is a much different brand than PacSun, different demographic and such. And so they, went down that path, and it was actually reasonably successful. The issue that happened was really the Groveport distribution center. Combining those, there were some problems, and so I ended up getting hired as a COO, and it was, a couple things. One was, look, the DC has some high expenses and there's some problems and some productivity issues. Go fix that. And then second, we would like to maybe get on some common systems and figure out how you do that. So I came in 2019, and I started a week before Black Friday, so you can imagine. And I ended up going to the DC, and a backlog of a million units, in e-com. I mean, it was fun, and I remember walking in thinking, like, oh my God, is this what I signed up for? But anyway, when I talk about the problems I like, okay, this was a big problem. Came up with a plan, and I think we were executing it, and it was a sound plan, and we were fixing the problems. Then, of course, COVID hit, and COVID was, what is Mike Tyson? He made that comment. Everybody, has got a plan until you get punched in the face, and it was something like that. We got punched in the face, and so. But the gentleman who had hired me had left, for personal reasons. And so here I am, a couple months into a job, the guy who hired me is gone, and we're going into COVID, and we're shutting down all our stores for who knows how long. And I was like, oh my God, this is this is a little scary. And they had a board chairman as interim CEO. And then him and I got along, and he asked me, hey, do you want to be interim CEO? And I said, of course. So I took over the mantle of interim CEO. It was a little bit of a scary time because your stores are closed. You don't have the cash flow, and there's all this uncertainty. So we ended up getting pretty scrappy. We turned around and we implemented ship from store. We had it implemented, and we implemented PacSun. We implemented it, and it was supposed to go live in Eddie Bauer. We did it literally in about 2 weeks. And, we had furloughed a lot of the company, but what we ended up doing is keeping a handful of about 100 store managers from each brand, and said, hey, you come into the stores and ship e-commerce orders, and you'll be by yourself, so it's social distancing. Well, of course, we had to wrestle with the malls. Hey, the mall's closed. Well, it doesn't matter. The lease says I have access to the store for business reasons. And then, hey, FedEx, pick up my packages. Well, are you crazy? The mall's closed. No, please come. Or, hey, store manager, go fill up some trash bags with the orders and go drop them off at the FedEx depot. So we were actually shipping about 40,000 units a day out of the stores, e-commerce orders fulfilled by store managers. So it gave us the cash flow. And the beauty was when the stores opened back up after 3.5 months, we had no aged inventory. So
Right.
all that seasonal merchandise was gone. And so, of course, that positioned us well. And then, of course, we had to talk and to suppliers and say, hey, look, we're, financially we're fine. Please ship us, all this stuff that I think every retailer had to do. But then we were able to basically really leverage that into, 2021, which is probably the best year we ever had. So it was, so I was basically responsible for all the operational goods items, and I had the president of each of Eddie Bauer reporting to me, the president of PacSun. Well, then Golden Gate Capital decided to sell Eddie Bauer to Spark and ABG, Authentic Brands Group. So I put together a team. We did the due diligence. We performed the transaction. And at the time, I wondered, am I putting myself out of a job? But then they came to me and said, well, we've liked what you've done. We'll make you co-CEO. And the gentleman that I was co-CEO with, he had been at the company 17 years and, really did a good job running PacSun. So, I understood the point that even though he had reported to me from an operational point of view, it was like, okay, let's just make us peers and, we'll split the business. And
Right.
he's a really good guy and we made it work.
So let's talk about co-CEO. So you don't, that's not a common structure. How does that work for people in the organization and for the two people that are sharing the role?
So I mean, a co-CEO. So it's interesting, and a lot of people will tell you it doesn't work, and it's not easy because I mean, normally you might have either a president and the CEO, or a CEO, COO, but there's one person in charge. Here you're kind of splitting it. So to me, there's a couple things that make this actually successful. One is you need respect, trust, communication, and collaboration. And if you have that among both co-CEOs, it can work. And then what you need is a clear delineation of responsibilities so that what's in your lane, what's in the other person's lane. But then to recognize the contribution that each of you, because when you come in here, nobody knows everything, right? I mean, people have different strong suits and different levels of experience. And then, when you have that respect and trust, you're able to know. So certain things, I could bring in Alfred, hey, what do you think here? And we communicated, I mean, we talked multiple times daily. So I think that was really critical to making this work.
Interesting. One of the things I know about you in conversations that we've talked about and things that I've read while you're at PacSun, you like to try things. You like to get involved in some things that others might not be doing, like accepting Bitcoin. What drives you in that area? Is it curiosity? Is it wanting to be on the bleeding edge or what?
It's not really want to be on a bleeding edge. I think that with retail, it's experiential. And look, the competition is so intense. And anybody can go to China. You get a designer? I can go and get any kind of article made and then try to sell it. But you need to basically differentiate yourself. And a lot of it is about, creativity and also execution. And so you look now, every business is a technology business. Before retailers was like, oh, we'll open the store, merchants will pick stuff, we'll ship it there. And the only as long as we have a POS and a sales audit system, life will be wonderful. And we'll print these big mainframe reports that are 6 feet high that nobody looks at, and if we miss it one day, everyone's going to scream. To now, I mean, think about it. Every company's a technology company. You look and customers, because they have access to all this technology at home, they expect the same thing with business. I look at this and say, okay, well, how can we try things to improve the business and differentiate ourselves? And I always laugh and I tell these vendors, look, I've got a champagne taste, but I have a beer budget. So look, I'm willing to work with you. And one thing, we'll take the product and we'll try to go and make sure it meets our requirements. And since we're the first guy, we'll have a lot of influence over the product direction. And then I'll use, whether it's PacSun or Crate and Barrel or Guess, I'll use the power of our brand to go and use our megaphone to help you be successful. Because look, to me, this is actually it. The reason why it works is because there is a joint agenda here. Because I don't want to put a lot of money in a startup if they fail, and then I ended up wasting a lot of money and time. And so I want them to be successful, and of course they need domain experience. So it actually works out pretty well.
Yeah, that's kind of the approach that I've taken throughout my career. Well, look, you've had an amazing career, lots of good stuff. You're a good guy. We're down to the end of our show. I have a 2-minute drill, 7 questions, 1-word answer. Are you ready, Mike Relich?
I am ready.
All right. A brand that you admire or that inspires you.
Yamaha,
Okay. Favorite app on your phone.
probably my banking app.
The last website other than Amazon that you shopped from.
Cyclegear.com.
Something that you're not good at, but that you wish that you were.
Music. I'm not good at music.
Charitable organization that you're passionate about.
International Rescue Committee. It was formed by Albert Einstein, and it helps basically people around the world, especially refugees.
If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Fix the environment.
Other than family, what's your most prized possession?
My motorcycle possession. I have 7 motorcycles. I'm a fanatic about bikes, and that's why I like Yamaha is my favorite brand, and that's why I shopped at Cycle Gear.
All right. Well, after you mentioned the Yamaha, I didn't think it was about an electric piano. I figured it was a bike. So where can people reach out to you, Mike, on social media if they'd like to connect?
LinkedIn is probably the best.
Okay, great. Hey, Mike, thanks for doing this. Nice to see you again. I'm glad we have an opportunity to interact a little bit in our respective roles now. You're a gentleman, and always learn something new from you every time we talk.
Well, likewise, Mark, I really appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate our friendship.
That's it. Today's game ball goes to Mike Relich for coming on the marketing playbook. To me, today's 3 game-winning marketing plays were as follows. Number 1, we all have so many tasks to get done in any given day, and within a company, there's always a balance of what to do first. Mike spoke about how he prioritizes projects, those that are revenue generating, then those that will reduce costs, and then everything else, even those items that help to keep the lights on. We have to be about profitability, so think about how you and your colleagues are prioritizing your projects. Number 2, Mike used the term fail fast. Mike's become someone who has tried lots of different programs in the spirit of trying to compete in a crowded marketplace. As he noted, make your decision of what to test, get it in the market, and then make your decision. Don't be afraid to walk away if it turns out that it didn't meet your expectations. And number 3, one thing that I really do not like hearing from anyone is something that Mike also referenced. When you ask someone to explain something, why they do it, how they do it, and they say, well, we've always done it that way, that just makes me shake my head. Question what you're doing. If it does not make sense to you, it's likely not the proper way to handle the task. Don't be afraid to question the status quo. Thank you, Playbook marketers, for listening to another episode. If you want to check out more pages of the Marketing Playbook, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast spot and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, the devil is in the details.